All right, cool. Hey, welcome to another edition of Influence Today with Chet Tart and Terry Lyles. Influence is all around us, shaping us, how we think, how we act, how we live, from media to the things we consume to people, things we wear, logos. And today we're going to explore the influence of David Kline, founder of MGMT, Management Accelerator, executive coach and leadership extraordinaire, an architect. He's done his own workbooks. And also, let's get a little bit of background about his career in Bridgewater, which is one of the toughest companies to join and stay with. And you've been there for a couple of years. So, David, welcome. I'm glad you're with us.
And Terry, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Over the 25 years of working with high performance teams and now coaching them, I got a couple of questions. What is the biggest leadership blind spot that you pick up when you're coaching these people?
It's funny. I would confess to probably being victim of my own leadership blind spot, and now that I've seen it in myself, I see it in a lot of others. So you mentioned I did 10 years at Bridgewater before spinning out on my own, and the 10 years before that I was at Moody's. So um, in 9 out of the 10 years I was at Moody's, promoted bigger teams, from two to ultimately 200 near the end, running a $400 million business for them. And I thought I kind of had it figured out, that obviously there was enough success going along the way. And I stepped into my career change at Bridgewater, and it was like smacking into a brick wall. And the biggest gap was like I had zero self-awareness, strangely enough. I started my career in consulting. That is a industry designed to make everybody replaceable, right? Like,
Hmm.
oh, you're a new analyst. I quit. Somebody else shows up and takes my spot the next day, and the client doesn't even notice. And so I sort of just thought like people were people, and you were either high performing or you weren't. You were good or you weren't. And as I got into Bridgewater, we put this really high fidelity set of metrics around people. I realized that applied to me too, and that it was probably unrealistic that I was good in every domain, that I could step into any situation and be the right person to do it. And so I felt like the biggest unlock for me halfway through my leadership journey was just developing a tremendous amount of self-awareness of realizing, that I was more of a recipe builder. I might not have been the big idea guy who could take a blank canvas and dream up that we should land on Mars. And I wasn't a super highly efficient operator who wanted to take something from 99 to 99.99%. But wow, could I translate from those big picture guys to the handoff of those 99% people? Um, and so I see that a lot with the leaders we work with. Is they've had some success, they're smart, they're high horsepower, they're really driving, but they don't have the understanding of where they come up short and where they shouldn't call their own number. So it's almost like probably the biggest blind spot is the concept of blind spots yourself, right? That you are imperfect, and that you could the more that you develop that, the more you can build the team around you to be complementary and have 1+1 = 3 instead of 1+1 equaling a half.
Yeah, I
That's
love that.
powerful.
Chet and I talk a
Excellent.
lot about blind spots
Yeah.
and how important that is. I mean, I've trained like 40 drivers, race car drivers in my career, still doing it for IndyCar, Formula One, NASCAR, sports car. I love racing. I grew up in Indianapolis around the racetrack, and the biggest thing they have are spotters. We call them coaches on our side, right?
Yeah.
But they have spotters. They're because you can't turn your head, you can't see. You have a mirror this big on each side, and you're doing 200 miles an hour with 33 other maniacs with road rage. So, a millimeter could mean you not just winning and losing, but living and dying. So it's really important. Like I think what you said is so powerful because to me, it's marriage and it's parenting.
Hmm.
We think we got it down until you have your child, and you're like, I don't know, I'm gonna screw this up. I mean, I feel really like I can coach leadership, but then when you start parenting your own kids because your emotions are involved, things change.
Though I found probably one of the things that made me a better leader most profoundly was becoming a parent.
Yes.
But there was it was interesting because it was right around the same time. Like when I switched to Bridgewater, I had a 15-month-old and we were about to have our second. And one of the things you start to realize is you sort of re-see the world through your kids' eyes,
Mhm.
and they're your kids. And so you become very patient. Like, oh, of course, you're two, so you shouldn't know how to do this thing. And it
Right.
should take us 2 or 3 months for you to figure it out. And then you go back to work and you're like, huh, why am I so patient with this new human in the world and so impatient with this person who's never done the thing I'm asking them to do and expecting them to be perfect on the first try? And so, the patience comes over here. And then also you start to see some success with leading your team at work. And you can sort of turn around to your family and say, like, oh, some of these same ways of me being clear with my expectations instead of imagining that you know exactly what I want, that applies at home too. And so I actually found it to be a pretty multiplying, amplifying relationship between the two worlds. But I agree. It also very much humbles you to realize just how little you know when you're raising kids.
Yes.
That's powerful insight. Every time I talk to you, there's something so common sense that just becomes incredibly powerful, like the last time we met. You talked about a self-awareness. When you're coaching people, is that the first thing that you talk about with them, about how to be self-aware and how people perceive them? Is that one of the first steps?
It's usually the second, I would say.
Okay.
Um, I sort of feel like I have to earn my right to have that conversation by helping them solve whatever problem they showed up to solve. Like there's almost a very pragmatic, okay, hey, you're feeling like your leadership team's not supporting you well enough, or you don't have the talent you need to scale, or your strategy is getting outrun by AI, or any one of the like very pragmatic like thing that's right in front of their face. And to some degree, I feel like I have to deal with that first. Like, okay, I'm getting some good counsel, I'm getting myself around that. And then we can have the conversation about like, okay, well, why did we get there? And usually why did we get there is some sort of, something in the way that that leader approaches the world, sees things, blind spots, biases, predispositions. Like I had you're just kidding. This would turn this into a 20-minute conversation of me picking on myself. Um, but
That's good
you know,
though. That's good.
my look, my parents were on again, off again throughout my childhood, split up officially when I was 12. So at 12, I'm like the man of the house. I have a younger brother, and I have this identity very wrapped up in figuring things out, like very self-sufficient. I finished the basement of our house so I could have my own bedroom, like stuff of that nature. Totally who I but flash forward 15, 20 years and you're leading teams, this identity of being self-sufficient, of figuring everything out myself, becomes relatively problematic when really what you need to be doing is delegating and empowering other people to do things.
Mhm.
Um, and so that sort of conversation to go to something like that with relatively a stranger, I think it's very hard to do until you sort of earn yourself through solving the thing that's in their way. But that's ultimately the thing that repeats itself over and over and is probably creating the circumstances of the thing we had to solve in the first place.
Yes.
So one of the questions I always ask is that when I'm coaching somebody, I'll say, "Why do you think your manager wants me to coach you?" And normally that's an indirect way of talking about self-awareness.
Usually the answer is, Chet, it's just for your privilege because I'm so good at what I do.
That's
Right,
right.
exactly. And you're like, oh, I'll give you that. I'll give you that one. And by the way, that may or may not be where we're going, but I'm glad to meet you. And you keep going. And it's so powerful about self-awareness because back to the blind spot, self-awareness, self-analyzing, who we are, who we think we are. It gets really complex. I mean, we're very complicated human beings. There's a lot in us, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. There's a lot of factors involved, and I love what you said a while ago about how do you start with somebody, and what I normally try to do is just connect, influence, and lead. So if I can connect with a person, I have an opportunity to influence them. That's why our show is called Influence Today, and then I can lead them. But if I don't connect, I'm not going to influence. I'm probably not going to lead, and it's not going to take. Or I have to try to dictate because now I get frustrated that it's not working. So I agree with what you said. You first have to connect, really, to find something in that person that you can say, "Do you trust me? I trust you. Can we do some work together?
100%. And honestly, sometimes the one of the easier ways to connect is lead again, sort of like this, like leading with your vulnerability, leading with your mistakes. Like one of the reasons I think our programs have been so successful, a lot of our marketing is around we'll tell you the stuff we screwed up. You know,
Yep.
like I'm not just going to get up there and tell you the perfect theory that was applied perfectly the one time it perfectly worked. I'm going to tell you the thousands of times and mistakes and missteps and traps I fell into and times my ego got in the way. And hopefully I can gift you not having to follow the same path. And
Hmm.
then that way you're starting a little bit further down. You're building on a foundation that over time we chiseled away and you can get further than we did.
Yes.
David, on your journey, you went to
Yeah.
Bridgewater and then
Yeah.
you started your own company. I have a couple of questions. What changed in your life when you went to Bridgewater? What did you have to unlearn when you left Bridgewater? And what values have you added to your management system here because of the journey you went through?
Holy cow. That's how
That's a
much time?
loaded question.
How
Yeah,
much
right.
time? Loaded question. That's like three bangers in one. Um,
I was thinking about it when you were talking. So,
let's
wow.
let's start with you might have to come back and remind me of the two, but let's start with the first one. Um, what did I learn going to Bridgewater? Um, it was honestly a bit of the best way I could describe it is like an overhaul of my management operating system. That there was at effectively like every level of it, in the sense of just to give like a few real examples. Moody's had 10 corporate values. I could not have told you what they were. They were the types of things that were on page 82 of the annual report. It
Right.
like wasn't, I don't think it means we didn't take it seriously. It was just sort of like a thing that was part of the company, but it wasn't something we ever talked about. My first meeting, my first live fire meeting at Bridgewater, after my month sitting alone doing like 80 hours of corporate training on the culture, um, people started citing management principles in the meeting for decision making. And I was like, what is happening in this room right now? Like, oh, well, this really reminds me of the principle where we're going to use cheap ways to buy down risk. And that's how we're going to make this decision and da da da. And so overnight, I go from a place where, it was something that we didn't really talk about to literally people knew the principles, were applying them in meetings because they were the fabric of how we made compounding decisions over time. So, like at that level, it's different. At the level of implementation of the tools to reinforce the culture, like we recorded every single meeting. Like any meeting room you walked into had a pad and you just hit record, and the meeting recorded and went into a
Wow.
library and could be accessed. We
Wow.
had tools for giving feedback. So everyone had an iPad, and if you were in a meeting and Dave wasn't being clear and articulate, you could give him a 2 out of 10 for synthesizing dot that would go into his public Twitter feed of feedback. So when I left, I had over 11,000 pieces of publicly aggregated feedback, as did everybody else. So everything changed. Uh, and it sort of then forces you to go through and reconcile to your second question of, okay, but which of these things are idiosyncratic either to a hedge fund, because a lot of that operating system was built around this idea of portfolio theory, right? Like even something as simple as OKRs, right? At a lot of companies, you set out to go after an objective. If you meet these five objectives, then you met expectations. At Bridgewater, I might have five objectives, and if I met three of the five, that was meeting expectations because wow, 60%, like that's good portfolio theory. And so, we're going to aim high in that way. And so, but the question is like, does that work in the world, or is that really just like a hedge fund thinking thing?
Mhm.
And then what are the other parts of that operating system that are idiosyncratic to a culture of radical truth and radical transparency, where we sort of signed up on the way in? You said, like, I am okay being in a culture where people are going to say things to me in an unvarnished, unfiltered way, and I have the ability to say it to them, and that is our agreement. Most companies don't do that. And even as I've worked with a handful of people who said, like, oh, can you help me Bridgewaterify our organization? The answer is largely no. I can't because you're sort of too far down the path. You're going to have to literally go rewrite the implied and explicit contractual agreements with your whole company if you wanted to do that. I think it was Reed Hastings talked about this when he created Netflix, that his previous startup before, he tried to backfit a culture after the fact and he couldn't do it, which is why they invested so much time up front to writing down that, famous culture deck for Netflix in the early days, because he didn't think they would be able to scale and change it after the fact. So therefore, you should sort of decide what it is up front. And you then naturally attract people who want to operate that way and repel people who don't. So I think that was those are sort of the two kind of primary tenets for what I didn't take with me when I left. Right? It's like, what are the things that don't really make sense if you're not a hedge fund, and what are the things that don't really make sense if you haven't signed up for that explicit of a culture agreement?
That's really powerful because you see people that and companies that are very successful and then they transition to something else and they're failures or they don't succeed at the same level and they're confused. And it's like because it's not just me, it's not just you. It is cultural. It's something that you have to build a team, whether that's a marriage, a family, a company, a society, a government, a universe. I mean, there's a lot of people involved. I remember, and Chet, you remember Bud Paxson. He's passed years ago. I mean, he ran Pax TV, but he started out, in radio. He had like 275 or 80 radio stations, and then he sold them all over the years and started with Pax TV. People said, "Oh man, that'll never work." That was back in the day. And he made it work, and it was very successful. He did very well. But one thing, I did consulting with Pax TV, and I remember one of the things I asked him was what you just said. I go, how do you deal with cultures? When you go in and buy a radio station, there could be 20, 30, 40, 50 people there. He goes, I learned early on not to just try to train all those people. And I thought, okay. He said, I would go in and literally try to eliminate as many as possible by buyouts. And then people who stayed, I know they really wanted to be there. And then he goes, I'd build a culture with the fiber of people that believed in that radio station. And that was the key to his success, in his opinion, in his words. I thought that was so spot on. You can't keep people that don't want to be there,
Right. Yeah, we talk a lot about it, Terry, as being magnetic, right? And
Yeah.
most times people think of magnets as the attracting side, but anyone
Yes,
who's played with them knows that they repel just as strongly as they attract.
that's correct.
And we do this exercise in our program around codifying your company values. And so the first thing we'll do is get them to write down what they think the values are. And inevitably they put down 7, 10. I think the most we ever had was 34. Someone's like, we have 34 company values.
Jeez.
And so first thing we want to do is slim it down to what they really mean. Because for us, if you're not going to be willing to make a sacrifice for it, it's just a slogan, right? It's like a nice thing to say, but it's sort of like the same way those values were in the back of our annual report. If you're not going to fire people who are unwilling to behave that way, if you're not going to reject really competent hires who could change your company but like wouldn't appeal that way, if you're not willing to walk away from customers who are putting your team in a position to like be, operate in contrary to that value, then it's not really your values. And so we do those 3 tests, the hire, fire, retire test, and then they come down to like 2 or 3 core behaviors. And then the second thing we do is like get them to write it in such a way that it becomes magnetic. One of my favorite stories on this is we had a healthcare company. It was an exec from a healthcare company. It was like, oh, our value is patients first. And I sort of roll my eyes because I'm like you and every other healthcare company on earth. Like, how is this in any way magnetic? And so he goes and tells this story. And he's like, well, have you heard the story of Carol? And I'm like, no, I haven't heard the story of Carol, it turned out. And so they have these patient advocates. So Carol gets a phone call. This mom is desperately trying to get a surgery approved by the insurance company for her 6-year-old daughter, needs it today. Hospital won't do the surgery. Insurance won't greenlight it. They're sort of stuck. The patient advocate is like trying and trying and trying. Finally, after like 4 hours, at like noon, gets in her car, drives 4.5, 5 hours, like 2 states away, and puts the surgery on her credit card. She's like, I know the insurance will ultimately approve it. The daughter desperately needed the procedure. The hospital was like entrenched. And so she's like, I just put patients first. And I'm like, okay, how do you build that mythology? Like that mythology had permeated this company. So inside those walls, patient first resonated really well. Like everyone knew the story of Carol and like that's what it really meant. The problem was if you're advertising to the outside world and people you want to bring in, patients first sounds just like every other healthcare company. So we will do this test of sort of putting your name over the logo and saying, do these things stand alone? Like it's, Bridgewater, I think, had some good examples like this where, saying that we're going to be honest or have integrity is one thing. Saying we're going to embrace radical truth and radical transparency says it very differently because a lot of people want to be, almost everybody wants to be honest and have integrity. Very few people want to live in a world where we put the word radical in front of both of the words. Radical truth, like literally the meetings are recorded. Everything you say will literally be on tape. Do you want to go to work in the Big Brother house or no? And so in a way, it made our recruiting job a lot easier because 90% of people were like, no way in hell do I want to live that way. But the 10% of people who could see the value, who it was aligned to like the way they behaved, were like, this is an asset. Of course I want to go there.
Yeah.
So how do you get to do that for your company?
That's strong and powerful. I got another two questions for you that would probably be killers for you. You go there and you train the people and you coach them. I don't know how long you stay with them, but how do they sustain excellence after you leave? Because I notice with coaching sometimes everyone loves it and everyone, follows it, and then the coach goes away. How do they sustain it? What have you seen the behaviors?
It's a good question. So I left Bridgewater now for going on 5 years, 4.5 years ago, and I've really only been coaching one-on-one the last 3. So I don't have like tons and tons of data in the sense of a lot of the people I started coaching, I'm still coaching. Some of the people I'm coaching, I stay in touch. And in some cases, they found other coaches. In some cases, it's sort of a more of an intermittent relationship. In some cases, we sort of broke through the thing they needed to break through. And for where they are on their journey and what it is they want to do next, they're okay. And so I don't know that there's I don't think I have a super profound insight yet. One of the things we look a lot at, maybe this is just our own personal interest. Like we look a lot at sports. Like we have kids who play sports. We're professional sports fans. By the weird way that Twitter works, I've become friends with executives and coaches at like professional sports teams, which is sort of a cool side residual of writing every day online. But what we love about sports is, one, they have a really clear scoreboard. So you can see the results. Winning and losing is very clear. Like for us in business, it's a lot harder because we have to define the rules and define the games and pick our competition every day. And so we're having to both write it and operate in it. They get very clear rules, very clear scoreboard, so we can see the results. But also a lot of they have the same dynamics in sort of hyperdrive, right? If you're a college football coach, you're recruiting probably a third of your team every single year. And so you look at someone like a Nick Saban who sustained success for 15 years, and you're like, I should probably learn recruiting from that guy. You can go back to the Oakland A's and Moneyball, and they sort of took analytics to identify talent that was hidden that others had overlooked. You're like, how could I apply that to my business? What is sort of we talk about this with a lot of the smaller businesses we coach, where you're not going to be able to go compete with the Metas and the Googles and the Amazons for great tech talent. You need to find someone who's broken in a way that's valuable to you, but ignored by the market. So how do you do that? So we look a lot at that world. And one of the things that's always striking to me is in the business world, we barely invest in our executives and our leaders. I saw two stats, and they both I had to check them to see that I could actually believe them. So one is 15% of new managers get 1 hour of training in their first year. So you've taken your star performer,
right.
You've promoted them to this new craft called leading teams, and like 1 in 6 will get 1 hour of training. I'm like, that feels crazy. And then the second stat was, and there's different studies, so somewhere between 25 and 40% of people who have been leaders in their career will get training. So sorry, 25 to 40% of people won't get any training. And I found this hard to believe, but then I have two really good friends who are 20 years into leading teams, um, both in financial services, both of them who have never had any training.
Yeah.
So I'm like, maybe
Amazing.
it's not crazy, but, oh, sorry, it's crazy, but maybe it's
Yeah.
not actually hard to believe. Um, and yet at the same time, if you look at the most elite athletes in the world, they don't have a coach. They have like seven.
Yeah.
They have one for
Absolutely.
strength and one
Yep.
performance and one for mindset and one for nutrition and then their head coach and then their position coach. And all of those, we're back to the blind spots, right? Or back to small tweaks that make the difference between being great and being elite. And why do we think that only applies to sports? But then we put leaders into positions of business that have six, seven, eight, nine-figure decision-making power and think they don't even need an hour of training.
I love that example because I use that in training as well in coaching that, professional athletes will train 90% of the time and perform about 10% of the time in their week. Corporate America is just inverted. They perform about 90% of the time, and if they're lucky, they get
So
to
you're
train
being
10%
generous.
of
I
the
think
time.
it's 99.99.
Exactly. Well, maybe they're listening to our podcast in the car. Maybe they're reading an online, maybe, but you're
Yeah.
right. So that 90-10 is like an eye opener to your point that, athletes at that elite level not only have one or two or five or seven different coaches, that's all they do every day. And they perform for 3 hours once a week or twice a week or three times a week, depending on the sport. And I think that's such a mind opener to corporate America. And we wonder why people burn out.
Yeah. Well, and why they fail. Like managers fail at
Fail.
roughly a 60% rate up and down the stack. And one of the things that we get a lot of positive reviews on in our programs is we create a space for practice.
Mhm.
So like one of the simplest things that every leader has to do is have a hard conversation. Maybe that's giving hard feedback. Maybe that's having to remove someone from a role. Maybe that's negotiating with like a peer over resources. Like there's all kinds of hard conversations we have to have. When do you ever get to practice?
Right. That's good.
Never is the answer. It's always live fire. It's like the first time you learn to fire someone, you're firing them.
Yes.
You're like,
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
and we're surprised it goes badly. And so we
Exactly.
do a lot of these small group breakouts where we're like, okay, we just gave you a different way to think about feedback. We gave you a framework. We literally give you a Mad Lib. Here's how you can literally say feedback in this way. And then for 15 minutes, you're going to go get in a room with two or three other people who you're getting to build a relationship with, but not at your company. No, like no what there's no incentive other than for them to help you and you to help them. And now practice. Like try it. Like try to say those words in that way and see how it feels. It's going to feel awkward, I bet. But it's going to feel less awkward when you say it three more times and get to go do it in a room for real with the person and have practiced and tried it out and like found your language with it. Um,
Just like sports, right?
yes.
Yep.
Hey,
Yeah.
Dave, when somebody hire you or looking to hire you, you brought up something that made me interested. What makes you different? What's unique? Why would I hire you? Like you were just talking about that healthcare. They're all the same. Do you think coaches are all the same, and what makes you different?
The hat.
Okay. All right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I say it a little tongue in cheek, but it's funny. A lot of whether it's in our programs or even one-on-one, a lot of I feel like what we made some intentional choices. And then we've gotten enough signal back to know that those intentional choices, in some cases, paid off, and in some cases, we pivoted. So one of them, I'm joking about the hat, but the hat's actually true. Um,
That's how I
most people,
recognize you. Yep.
well, and um, most people don't have the fondest memories of their corporate management trainers, but most people, especially if they were athletes, can tell you with like this vivid time machine like fidelity
Mm.
about their favorite coach, the person who like met them where they were, who believed in them more than they believed in themselves, saw the potential, pushed them to be better. And so the fact that this triggers a little bit more of those associations was one of the things we were testing and actually stuck with. Um, the actual answer to the question beyond the hat, though, one is I've been there. Like a lot of I'm lucky. I mean, we're all lucky, right? Because you've been there as well. Like a lot of our competition um, they went and took a course to learn how to coach leaders. I'm like, I led teams for 200 years. Like, I know that it's hard. I know that at times it sucks. I know that things change out from under you and how you have to navigate them. I know people tell you one thing and do another. Uh, I know all the play, like I know a lot of, and probably not all of them because there's lots of ways to screw up, but I know a number of ways to screw up and can maybe help you avoid them. And so I think one of the things we hear a lot is that been there, done that experience is invaluable.
Yeah.
The other thing we hear a lot is that we're very authentic. So especially in our programs, Mara and I, so my wife and I do this together. Her background was Goldman Sachs and Google. And so when we run those programs, you have both of our voices in the room. She was always in sort of the sales side, and I was in everything but the sales side. So there's a little bit of complementary in that nature. But we're also sort of see the world similarly enough that you can recognize the operating system, but differently enough that our voices will connect with people differently. So I will joke that, we'll talk about feedback and I'll mention my 11,000 pieces of feedback and how I just examine them dispassionately, like they're true or not true. And Mars like, no, like when people give me feedback, it like hits me in the gut. And I don't love it. And I can still feel like the 17-year-old girl who gets that like hot red feeling. And she's like, there's people on your team like me, and there's people on your team like Dave. And you got to go meet them both where they are. And so that authentic sort of dinner table, husband and wife banter, at first we thought it was a bug. Like we actually kind of tamped it down, didn't really mention it. People would be in the third session and be like, you guys have the same last name. Are you related? And we're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She's downstairs, I'm upstairs, we're in the
We are
same
now.
house. We share a business, we share children, a mortgage, all those good things. But what we really started to hear more and more was like both voices were actually helpful. And so we sort of turned our bug into a feature. So I'd say authentic and been there, done that experience. And then we do get quite a bit of praise for taking complicated things and making them simple.
That's
I'd say those are
powerful.
probably the three.
Yeah. Let me end with a lightning round. A couple of quick questions. Are you another one? I'll start with an easy one. For the summer vacation, is it the ocean or the mountains?
Yes.
All right.
We are
Depends if
we're
it's
going
him
to
or
Costa
her.
Rica. We're going to Costa Rica, so we're going to start by the volcano, and then we're going to end in a surf town. So yes,
One book you would recommend all leaders to read,
all leaders. Oh man.
or one book you would recommend.
Um, well, it's funny because usually people ask me for book recommendations. I'm like, well, what problem am I solving? Um, the um, One of my favorites, since we were talking a lot about culture, um, I do really like Ben Horowitz's book, like What You Do Is Who You Are,
Great book. Yeah.
or Who You Are Is What You Do. I might be getting it backwards, but from Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz sort of talked about like looking at all these companies and sort of what made cultures that were enduring, sustainable, differentiated. And a lot of it just comes down to kind of the actions. The sum total of all the actions of you and your team are what will dictate the culture, and then practical ways you can try to nudge that in the direction you think sets you up to win. So I thought that was a very, I really enjoyed that as a book on culture building.
Well, thank you. That's strong. How about this one? The worst advice leaders still follow. I do this to everybody, David.
Worst advice leaders still follow. What's the usual answer, Chat?
The usual answer is that they switch the culture, they hard change it, and the other one is they don't delegate. Most they said I can do this better. I mean that's a big deal.
It's funny. But who's giving them that advice? Like that's not advice that people are telling them when they're following. To, like keep everything yourself and don't do it. It's almost like what's the good advice people aren't following? Like you
That's
should
another
be
one.
following it. Hmm. One of the I don't even know if it's advice, and so this might not be totally answering the spirit of your question, but maybe as someone who had a corporate career, was always going to start his own thing. I think the worst advice I was probably giving myself, or this belief I had that eventually unlocked, was I needed to have the big idea. That like once I had the clever idea that would let me go into the world and change it, then I would start my business. And I think now with all the leaders I've worked with us starting our own business, um, I actually think that's upside down. Like I think you could start by buying a business. You could start by taking a lot. There's so many existing ideas that just you can just go outrun people. You can go work harder or you can just out operate them. I mean, try to get a phone call back for a painting quote. Like all you have to do is call people back and you could be like the biggest painting company in town, or the biggest
Yep.
window cleaner in town. Like, just name your thing. And so for me, I think that advice of like, you got to have these big ideas and go raise money and be venture backed and whatever else. And I think for 99% of entrepreneurs, that's bad advice. It's almost like just get started. Go buy something, go pick on something that's like annoying to you and take them down by just being good at that one thing. And I think that is something I wish someone had told me 15 years ago instead of me figuring it out 20 years into my career.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts that you want to share that you haven't, that would be something that's a bomb for us to get?
Something that's a bomb. Well, one of the other, it's because you said bomb, it was the first thing that jumped in my head. So, um, one of the other things people come to us a lot is because I tell a lot of the stories of getting feedback at Bridgewater. They're like, "Oh,
I love those
how
stories. Love them.
how can I give people, and that's great. They'll come with me with really loaded language. It'll be like, how can I like give feedback that really hits, that really, I really want to land my feedback, and I'm like, okay, well, first off, your problem is if you thinking about feedback as a weapon is probably not going to get you where you want to get to. Um, and so, but we tell this story where, and everyone ends up nodding and being like, oh yeah, I've been there. And so, um, if you want to give better feedback, my advice is like give it all the time. And then people were like, well, and I'm like, yeah, here's where the well is. The story goes like this. Um, the person on your team does something that like didn't line up with what you expected, and you're like, I'm sure they noticed. I'm not going to mention it. Week goes by, they do the same thing again. You weren't there, but somebody else was, and they come around. They're like, "Hey, like Chet, sort of missed this deadline again." And you're like, "Oh yeah, 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 but I don't want to. I don't want to be the one to give feedback to Chet based on someone else telling me. I'm just, I'm sure he knows." And then it happens a third time, and you're like, "Yeah, you know what? Chet seems kind of overwhelmed. I'm sure I can just chalk it up to that." And so over time, you're building mosaic, right? Each one of the observations, I'm putting a piece of tile into this mosaic, and I've got this picture of Chet that you have this weakness, you have this gap, you have this thing. But all along the way, you've gotten no signal from me whatsoever. Not a single one of those pieces of feedback got to you so that you could either say, like, hey, Dave, you're missing it, or hey, wow, Dave, thanks. I could correct that pretty easily if I just pivoted this way, did this thing differently, changed my system, all these things that competent humans can do if given the opportunity and the signal to do it. And what ends up happening is at some point, it happens for like the fifth time, the sixth time, the 10th time, months have gone by, years have gone by, and I drop what we affectionately call the synthesis bomb. Like I declare you incompetent at your job and incapable of improving, even though at no point have I given you any feedback and the opportunity to do it. Well, now I've gone from one problem to two problems. So one problem is you're not performing in the way that I would hope. That was the original problem we could have dealt with 2 months ago by mentioning it. But the second problem is now you don't trust me because I've been walking around collecting all this data and observing all these places. I'm observing you coming up short. I always, when I'm telling the story, I was thinking of my brother was like 6 years old and we were going into a bank and I went in through the doors in the middle and he went through the door on the left and the door on the window was a window. Like he like went smashed into it, right? That's what it's like when you don't tell people that they're running into problems that they don't see. And so it's not kind of me not to have mentioned it to you all along the way and then drop the synthesis bomb. Like that's me being selfish because I didn't want to have the hard conversation. So I had to just have the hard conversation because when you have them and it's just a small piece of feedback, they're actually pretty easy. When you try to have them at the end after you drop the bomb, they're really hard and they're hard to recover from, and you've wasted so much time. And so in the same way, like a coach is not going to wait till the end of the season to tell you you didn't do much in game two, like do the same thing with the people on your team.
That's
Yeah.
great, Dave.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. You were a great guest today. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing us such clear, hard-earned insights from all where have you been. You've taken years to get to where you are. If somebody wants to get in touch with you and they want to take one of your courses or at least find out, how will they do that?
Yeah, look, easiest place to find us. I'm on Twitter and I'm on LinkedIn. Dave Kline, you'll see the guy with the hat on both of those. We also have a newsletter. It's the MGMT Playbook. So mgmtplaybook.com. Free to subscribe, comes out every week. There's probably 140 issues in there now, practical playbooks, templates. We just try to, again, make all those hard management moments easier by sharing our lessons and giving you simple ways to navigate them.
So you have a playbook that they can get, and then if they want to learn more, they contact you, and then you actually get dirty in their company, right? Get your hands dirty.
Sure thing. Yeah, we have live programs we run with new managers as well as experienced managers. I have a small roster of executives I coach one-on-one, as does Mar. So yeah, just
Do
reach
you
out. We're
coach
here.
mostly?
We're the whole company. You can just email us.
Do you coach mostly CEOs or managers, which is more of an expertise that you have?
For the one-on-one coach, the programs we have one for new managers, one for experienced leaders. For the one-on-one coaching, it's mostly executives. I would say 7 of the 8 are CEOs and one's a CFO.
Great. Terry, any last statements?
No, it's great to meet you, and love the knowledge sharing. Leaders, good leaders, in my opinion, are always trying to be, good to great. Like, how can I learn up? I tell my son all the time, you didn't lose today in tennis. What did you learn? The score says you lost, but tell me one thing you learned and we'll go have lunch. So I
I
love
love
the
it.
learning aspect. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you,
this has
Zach.
been powerful, Dave. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. If you enjoyed the program, please hit like and share. Influence Today is heard at least 3 times a month on many, many places, Apple, Spotify, and LinkedIn also. Hey, thanks to Terry for being with us. Thanks, David, for being with us. And we look forward to talking to you again on Influence Today.